So today I want to talk to you about your different parts of self and your self-management system and give you a little bit of an overview on what that system looks like and why we use it. So in essence, I talk about, and if you go to my book, The Trouble with Trauma, you'll actually see this broken down in a little bit more detail. But we talk about our emotional parts, and then we have our parts that are sort of numbing or avoidant of any emotion. And then we've got our more practical, rational parts. So I want to start off talking about your emotional parts. So in our emotional parts, we have our child parts, and they're the ones that we developed when we were in our childhood, obviously. But I talk about the fact that the first part of you that feels really rejected, that sense of being abandoned as a child, which is something we all experience, by the way. So please don't think that, you're the only one that has this fear. We actually all have it. And it's a normal part of how we develop as children. So as a 4-year-old, that's actually the first point in your life where you recognize that, you did something wrong maybe, but you recognize that you're responsible. So I'll give you a little bit more detail about this when I talk about child parts and how they developed, which is in the next video. Okay, but I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview. So you'll have at least 3 child parts. So one is your most withdrawn, avoidant part, the part that you go to when you're feeling really that sense of rejection or a feeling that you're going to be rejected, so you avoid everybody else. I always say to people, that's the doona day part of you. That's the one that just wants to curl up in a fetal position in bed and pull a doona over your head, right? That's the most withdrawn, rejected feeling that we ever get as human beings. So then if we're going down towards our avoidant parts, which we do if we can't change the situation. So any situation that we're in, we get triggered emotionally. We go into either our child parts, which is based on fear, or we go into our protector parts, which is where we get angry because we're actually feeling a sense of shame and we're trying to push that back to the person who made us feel that way, right? So, and I'll break this. I know this is like, wow, this is making a whole lot of sense, but it's a lot of detail that has to be unpacked in there, right? So I want you to just kind of stay with me a little bit. Think about the diamond. The bottom half of the diamond, which is where you're going down to your avoidance, is where we go when we can't change the situation. So we either get triggered into fear or anger. Anger, that's really the overlay of shame, okay? So there's a shame feeling that gets triggered, and so we get angry about it. And the shame belongs to the child parts, but the child sort of is in fear of these things happening again and being rejected all the time. Because that's really what we're trying to avoid, is this feeling of not being wanted or being rejected by others. Or a sense that, they might not accept or like us exactly the way that we are. So when we recognize that, okay, we can know that we have our child parts that are really the basis of our ego and how we show up in the world. And our protector parts, which are the parts that sort of get angry and assert ourselves, are really more like adolescent parts of ourselves. We've modeled usually on our most, assertive parent usually, or aggressive parent. So if you had a parent that was very critical of you, then your protector part could be extremely critical. And so that's usually the part that when you'll react, you'll be triggered and you'll react to something. And then if you're the, scream and shout person, and then afterwards you kind of go, oh, I hate that about myself. It just reminds me of my dad because he used to do that and I hate it when I do that and I really don't want to do that. It's just a recognition. It's very normal for that part of you to be modeled on the most critical parent, because when you're a child and you're getting into trouble, right, the person who's going to make you feel worst about it is the critical parent. So what we do is we internalize this version of the critical parent and we become this very strong critic of ourselves. So that internal parent voice actually gets in and tells you all of the things that you're doing wrong before, in the hope that you'll stop yourself getting into trouble really with that person at some other point. Does that make sense? So as a child, we kind of go, We've got this internal critic that develops so that we don't do things that are going to get us into trouble with the critical parent, right? So it's a fear-based thing, okay? But it becomes this internal critic voice that tends to be nastier to you than you ever would be to anybody else. And it's an important part of when we talk about our language recognition and our parts of self, that we need to start to understand this part of us really well. Because it's the part that we hate the most usually. It's the part that seems to react and get out of control really quickly. And as we start to understand it a bit more, we can at least start to be a bit more accepting of it and not so nasty about it, right? Because that part, whenever you feel like you've rejected this part within you, or you hate that part of you, there's no opportunity to bring the system back together, right? So we have to stop talking about it as something that we hate and start to try and understand where that's come from and why we actually react that way, right? Because it is part of your experience. Everything that we do, every way that we turn up and show up in the world is part of the experience that we've had from, childhood and growing up. So I want you to kind of come back to this idea that you'll have 3 child parts, you've got 3 protector parts, you've got your most extreme version of each, and then you have one of each that goes down into the avoidance. So when you can't change the situation that you're in, you end up moving into one that becomes withdrawn or avoidant. So in the case of a child part, that becomes the part that really does withdraw and keeps yourself alone. Sometimes if you've ever experienced any level of depression, that's the part of you that feels like it's safer to be by yourself. Safer not to be around those people because you don't want to bring everybody down. Nobody really wants to be around me anyway. So that's that child part that then keeps yourself to yourself. You make decisions that keep you from interacting with others. On the flip side, then in the protector side of things, our aggressive element that kind of can't be, really out in the world, but we can't change it, becomes more of a passive aggressive part. So that's the part of you that will withdraw. You won't say anything necessarily, but you might be doing stuff that causes somebody else some grief at some point, maybe now or maybe later down the track. But you might not say anything, but in your mind you're kind of thinking, yeah, whatever, you're such an idiot, like I don't even need to put up with this, but you're not actually saying it. You might be then doing things or taking actions that in a way to try and cause somebody else some pain, but without being really overt about it. So passive aggressive kind of behavior is just something when you've been triggered, but you can't really change it, you can't react to it, so we kind of try and push it down and quell it down. So I want you to think about all of the things that move us towards our avoidance and numbing parts, which is all of our addictive behaviors, whether that's losing yourself in shopping online, watching porn, just losing yourself in television generally, or any other addictive things, scrolling, social media, just random stuff. That's avoidance. They're all of the activities that we engage in because we don't like how something's making us feel. It can also be things like drugs or alcohol or eating food. Like there's a whole bunch of things that we do to try and change our emotional state without consciously being aware of what we're doing. So we use all of this sort of, avoidance strategies to change how we're feeling because we don't feel that we actually can rationally change the experience that we're having. Now, that can be for a range of reasons. Maybe it's a job that you feel you're stuck in, or a marriage that you feel that you're stuck in, or a situation that you feel like you cannot change. Now, whether you continue to stay in that situation and not find a way to change it, then that can lead to longer term addictions, right? And so for any of you who struggled with addictions in the past, I want you to recognize that it's usually just a coping mechanism for a system that you don't feel like you have any choice to change. We always have a choice, but sometimes our language, so go back to what I said about language, sometimes the language that we use makes it seem like we can't change things, right? But we can. We just have to strategize and think and make a plan about what we can do to change things. All right. So I will talk to you more about the other side in the next couple of videos, which is where we find our rational parts. And the whole point of this little bit of education for you is to help you learn how to manage and keep yourself in your rational sort of parts of self and moving forward in your life. Okay. See you soon.